There are moments in history when the veil between the seen and unseen thins, so much so that two souls, separated by decades, touch the same eternal truth. Aimee McPherson was praying in her room in 1923 when something extraordinary happened, something that would only make complete sense 50 years later, when Kathryn Kuhlman opened her mouth and spoke the exact same words. Have you ever felt that certain words reach you from a place you can't explain, as if an invisible presence whispered truths into your ear, truths your mind hadn't yet discovered? What I'm about to tell you challenges everything you think you know about time, destiny, and divine revelation. Because when Aimee saw those words in vision, she had no idea she was receiving a message that would be confirmed by another woman decades in the future, in a way no human mind could have planned. But before we get to the psalm that changed everything, you need to understand who Aimee McPherson was. And even more important, you need to understand why some people are chosen to receive visions that only make sense when time is complete. It was October 17th, 1890, when Aimee Elizabeth Kennedy was born on a small farm in Canada. But from childhood, there was something different about her, something her mother, Mildred, couldn't explain. The girl spoke with people no one else could see, sang songs no one had taught her, and at 7 years old, she asked a question that chilled the blood of every adult present. She looked up at the sky on a Sunday afternoon and asked, why does God choose some people to carry messages they themselves don't understand? No one knew how to answer. Years later, when Aimee was a young woman of 17, she met Robert James Semple, a young Pentecostal preacher who would change her life forever. Robert wasn't just a man of God. He was a man who saw beyond the veil, and it was he who first recognized in Aimee something even she didn't understand. There's something in you, he said one night in 1908, that doesn't belong solely to this time. It's as if you are a vessel chosen to carry visions that are greater than a single life. They married. They left for China as missionaries. And then, tragedy struck. Robert died of typhoid fever at the age of 29, leaving Aimee a widow and pregnant, lost in a foreign country, unaware that she was being prepared for something that would transcend any human pain. Have you ever experienced a loss so profound that you felt as if a part of your soul had been ripped away? That was the abyss where Aimee found her true calling, because sometimes it's only when we lose everything that we can clearly hear the voice that has always been there, whispering. Back in the United States, Aimee began to preach, but not like other preachers. Her words had a power she herself couldn't explain. Crowds gathered, miracles happened, and then, in 1923, came the night that would change not only her life, but create an invisible bridge to the future. It was a cold Tuesday in November. Aimee was in her hotel room in Detroit, preparing for a huge service the next day. Thousands of people were waiting for her. The pressure was immense. She had spent hours trying to hear from God about what to preach, but felt as if she were banging on a closed door. Physical and spiritual exhaustion weighed on her like a dense fog. It was then, in this moment of absolute vulnerability and need, that it happened. She was kneeling beside the bed, her face in her hands, when she felt something shift. First, it was the temperature. The cold November room suddenly filled with a gentle warmth, as if someone had lit an invisible fireplace. Then it was the silence. Not just the absence of sound, but a silence so profound, it seemed to have its own weight. And then, the presence. Aimee lifted her face and saw that a soft golden light had begun to fill the space. Not a light that hurt her eyes, but a luminosity that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. And with this light, a peace she had never experienced before, as if all anxiety, all pressure, all uncertainty had been instantly dissolved. It was in this state of absolute tranquility that the words began to appear, not written in the air, but imprinted on her mind with a clarity that was sharper than any physical text. Each letter formed with divine precision, each syllable carrying an eternal weight. They were verses from a psalm, but not just any psalm. It was as if each word were a golden key, opening doors in her soul that she didn't even know existed. The words came with a sensation she had never experienced before, as if she were being connected to something eternal, something that existed before her and would continue to exist afterward. Aimee grabbed paper and pen and wrote down every word exactly as she saw it, every comma, every pause, as if she were transcribing a celestial document. And when she finished, she felt a peace so profound that she fell asleep still kneeling, with the paper in her hands. The next day, she went up to the pulpit in Detroit and did something she had never done before. Instead of preaching her planned sermon, she opened the paper and read exactly the words she had received in the vision. The effect was instantaneous. People began to cry. Others fell to their knees. An invisible power swept through the entire auditorium. But here's what Aimee didn't know at that moment. Those words weren't just for that night. They weren't just for those people. They were a seed planted in time, waiting to germinate decades in the future, through another woman who hadn't even been born yet. Can you imagine receiving a message and only discovering its true meaning 50 years later? As if God were operating in a dimension where past, present, and future meet at a single point of revelation. Aimee kept that paper for the rest of her life. She used those verses hundreds of times in her services, but she always felt there was something more, as if the words carried a weight that went beyond her understanding, as if they were a code waiting to be completely deciphered. She died in 1944, carrying with her the certainty that she had received something precious, but without knowing that she had planted a prophetic seed that would blossom through another life. And that's when Kathryn Kuhlman entered the story. Kathryn was born in 1907, 17 years after Aimee. But unlike Aimee, who from childhood showed signs of a supernatural calling, Kathryn was an ordinary young woman from Missouri, the daughter of farmers, with nothing to indicate the extraordinary destiny that awaited her. But God rarely chooses those who seem obvious. He chooses vessels that can be molded, and Kathryn would be shaped through a journey that would lead her to the exact place where Aimee's words were waiting to find their true home. Kathryn began preaching young, but her early years in ministry were filled with struggle and doubt. She married Burroughs Waltrip in 1938, a married man who left his wife to be with her. The scandal nearly destroyed her ministry. The weight of guilt and public judgment brought her to a place of utter brokenness. Have you ever felt so lost that you couldn't even pray? So distant from God that your own words seemed to echo into the void? This was the desert Kathryn traversed for nearly a decade. A necessary desert, because sometimes we need to be completely emptied of ourselves to become the perfect vessel for something greater. In 1946, Kathryn made the most difficult decision of her life. She left Burroughs and moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Alone, broken, but ready to start over. She rented a small church and began preaching to empty pews. Literally, there were nights when only 3 or 4 people showed up. But it was in this solitude that the miracle began to form. Because when you remove everything that is superficial, when you strip away all distractions and pretensions, what remains is the perfect space for God to work. And then, one Sunday morning in 1947, something impossible happened in Kathryn's small auditorium. A woman who had arrived on crutches walked away. Kathryn hadn't even prayed for her, hadn't even touched her. The miracle simply happened during worship, as if an invisible wave of power had swept over the place. But it wasn't the miracle itself that marked that moment. It was what Kathryn felt when she saw the woman walking. a sensation she had never experienced before, as if she had been connected to a source of power that came from far beyond her. And along with that sensation, a single phrase echoed in her mind: "I am the one who heals." From that day on, miracles became a constant mark of Kathryn's services. But she always insisted that it wasn't her who healed. "I don't heal anyone," she would say. "I simply get myself out of the way and let the Holy Spirit work." Dakha. And it was precisely this attitude of complete surrender that prepared her for the most important moment of her life, the moment she would receive confirmation of a vision that had been planted decades earlier through a woman she had never met personally. It was 1967. Kathryn was at the height of her ministry. Her services attracted thousands of people. Her radio and television programs reached millions. But one Wednesday night, alone in her hotel room in Los Angeles, she felt a restlessness she couldn't explain. She had just led a powerful service where dozens of people had been healed. She should have been at peace, but there was something in the air, an expectation, as if the Holy Spirit were preparing something special. Kathryn knelt beside the bed and began to pray. But this time, instead of speaking, she just listened. And that's when it happened. Words began to flow through her, not from her, but through her. Words that came with such authority and beauty that she could barely breathe. They were verses from a psalm she knew, but that had never impacted her heart so deeply. Each word carried an eternal weight. Each phrase opened a new dimension of revelation. And when it was over, she was crying, unable to explain why. She wrote the words exactly as she had received them. And the next morning, she did something she rarely did. Instead of following her normal program, she dedicated the entire service to those verses. The reaction was extraordinary. It was as if those words had a power of their own, a power that transcended any human ability of communication. But what Kathryn didn't know at the moment was that she was living the second half of a miracle that had begun 44 years earlier, on a cold Detroit night, through a woman named Aimee McPherson. The connection would only be discovered years later, in a way that no human mind could have orchestrated. And when it was finally revealed, it would forever change the way we understand the nature of prophetic visions and the way God works through time. Are you ready to discover what that psalm was? And more importantly, are you ready to understand how two women, separated by decades, were used to deliver the same eternal message in a way that proves some truths transcend time? What happened next will challenge everything you think you know about coincidence and destiny. Because when you hear the exact words that both Aimee and Kathryn received and discover how they were connected, you will never look at your own spiritual experiences the same way. The answer is coming, and it's more extraordinary than any human mind could imagine. It was 1975. Kathryn Kuhlman was organizing her personal papers when she found a letter that would change everything. A letter that had arrived 3 weeks earlier, but that she hadn't yet fully read. It was from an elderly lady named Dorothy, who had been Aimee McPherson's personal assistant in the last years of her life. Dorothy was 82 years old and felt it was time to pass on some treasures she had kept for decades. In the letter, she mentioned that she had some of Aimee's personal papers, including notes of visions and revelations that the evangelist had received over the years. "I have observed your ministry," Dorothy wrote, "and there is something in your words that deeply reminds me of Aimee, something in the way you receive and deliver revelations. I would like to share some documents that may interest you." Kathryn felt her heart race. She had always admired Aimee McPherson from afar, but had never had access to intimate material from her spiritual life. She immediately called Dorothy, and they arranged a meeting. 2 weeks later, Kathryn was sitting in Dorothy's small room in Pasadena, surrounded by boxes of yellowed papers, letters, sermons, personal notes, a whole lifetime of ministry preserved with loving care. "There's something specific I want to show you," said Dorothy, her trembling hands holding a sealed envelope. "Aimee gave this to me a few days before she died. She said that one day someone would come who would need to see what was inside, someone who would understand." Dorothy opened the envelope with reverent care. Inside, a folded paper yellowed with age. Aimee's handwriting was clear and strong. At the top of the page, a date, November 17th, 1923. Vision received in Detroit. Kathryn began to read, and that's when the world stopped. Those first words made her heart leap. It was impossible. But as she continued reading, the impossible transformed into divine reality. The words on the paper were exactly the same as those she'd received in 1967, word for word, comma for comma. Even the spaces between the sentences were identical. But it wasn't just the text. It was the way it was written. Aimee's calligraphy had a specific urgency, as if she were transcribing something that couldn't be lost. And Kathryn recognized that urgency because she'd felt exactly the same thing when she received her vision. It was like looking into a mirror of her own spiritual experience, reflected across 4 decades. The same psalm, the same version, the same sequence of verses that had transformed her life and ministry. Not just any translation of Psalm 139, but a specific version that seemed to have been filtered through the heart of God, with nuances and phrases that were unique, as if it were a celestial translation made specifically for that eternal moment. But there was more. In the margins of the paper, Aimee had made notes, small observations about what she felt when she received each phrase, and those notes were exactly the same feelings, the same sensations, the same parallel revelations that Kathryn had experienced. It was as if 2 souls had touched the same eternal spring and drunk from the same living water. "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me." Have you ever felt that exact moment when the impossible becomes real? When your mind simply can't process what's happening because it's too big to fit into human logic? Kathryn began to cry, not the gentle weeping of ordinary emotion, the deep crying of someone who has just touched eternity. Dorothy watched her in silence, with the smile of someone who had fulfilled a sacred mission. "How is this possible?" Kathryn whispered, holding the paper with trembling hands. "There are things," Dorothy replied, "that transcend our understanding of time and space. Aimee always said that some revelations don't belong to one person. They belong to an eternal purpose that manifests itself through chosen vessels at specific moments." At that moment, Kathryn understood something that would forever change her view of a divine calling. She wasn't just Kathryn Kuhlman, an evangelist from Pittsburgh. She was a link in a prophetic chain that had begun long before her and would continue long afterward. The words she had received weren't hers. They were from God, first given to Aimee as a seed, and then to her as the ripe fruit. 2 generations, one single revelation, an eternal purpose manifesting itself through time. But the story gets even more extraordinary, because Dorothy had one more surprise in store. "There's something else you need to know," she said, walking over to an antique drawer. From there, she took out a small leather notebook, worn by time and constant handling. Aimee didn't receive that vision just once. She received it exactly 7 times throughout her life. Always the same, always in the same format. And she wrote down each date here, along with observations about the circumstances of each revelation. Kathryn opened the notebook with reverence. The dates were there, written in the same careful script. 1923, 1928, 1933, 1938, 1941, 1943, and lastly, 1944. just 3 days before Aimee died. But it was the observations that made everything even more extraordinary. Next to each date, Aimee had written brief notes about what was happening in her life at the time of each vision. 1923, Detroit, the night before the Great Revival. I felt lost and small. 1928, during a financial crisis in the ministry. Needed to remember that He provides. 1933, after Mother's death. Consolation in the darkness. 1938, before the most dangerous missionary trip. Courage for the unknown. 1941, during unjust legal proceedings. Peace in the midst of the storm. 1943, worrying medical diagnosis. Certainty that He rules over all. 1944, 3 days before leaving. Preparation for the final journey. Each vision had arrived at a moment of specific need. They weren't empty repetitions, but renewed applications of the same eternal truth to always new circumstances. As if God were saying, remember the promise. It still holds. It will always hold. And now tell me, Dorothy continued with a mysterious gleam in her eyes, on what dates did you receive this same revelation? Kathryn felt a chill down her spine. She grabbed her own planner and checked. 1967, 1972, 1974. 3 times so far. Always the same vision. Always the same words. Always following a pattern she had never noticed. Dorothy did a quick calculation and smiled. If the pattern continues like Aimee's, you will receive this vision 4 more times. The last will be a few days before your departure for eternity. And that's exactly what happened. Kathryn received the vision again in 1976, 1978, 1980, and for the last time in February, 1976, 3 days before her death. Always the same words. Always the same inexplicable peace. Always the same feeling of being connected to something much bigger than herself. Now do you understand why this story is so extraordinary? It's not just about 2 women who received the same revelation. It's about how God operates in a dimension where time is just a tool, not a limitation. That psalm wasn't about geographical location. It was about eternal presence. It was about the impossibility of escaping a love that transcends space and time. It was about the promise that no matter where you go, no matter how lost you feel, there is a presence that goes with you. But here's what makes this revelation even more powerful. When you look at the lives of Aimee and Kathryn, you realize that both received these words at the exact moments when they most needed that specific truth. Aimee was at the height of a ministry that constantly took her into unknown territories, new countries, new cultures, new challenges. She traveled more than any evangelist of her time, often feeling like a stranger in a strange land. Those words were the anchor that reminded her that no matter how far her journeys took her, she would never be truly alone. Kathryn, on the other hand, had spent years feeling banished from God's presence because of her personal choices. The scandal surrounding Aimee McPherson's marriage to a married man created a sense that she was running from God's face, hidden in the shadows of guilt and shame. But those very words, those very scriptures, became her liberation, showing that not even her deepest flaws could separate her from eternal love. For Aimee, the psalm was about divine adventure. For Kathryn Kuhlman, it was about impossible redemption. But for both, it was about the fundamental truth that you cannot escape a God who has chosen to love you unconditionally. But for you, listening to this story now, these words arrive at the precise moment you need to know you are not alone, that there's a purpose being woven through your life, a purpose you may not fully understand, but which is part of an eternal design. Have you ever wondered why certain spiritual truths touch your heart in a way you can't explain? Why some words seem to have been written specifically for you? Why certain Bible verses leap off the page as if illuminated with their own light? Perhaps it's because they were. Perhaps, like Aimee and Kathryn Kuhlman, You are a chosen vessel to carry a revelation that transcends your current understanding. Perhaps the anxieties you feel during your prayers, the dreams that visit your nights and linger in your memory for days, the inexplicable feelings that wash over your soul at the most unexpected moments are pieces of an eternal puzzle being assembled through your life. Think about the times you felt God was trying to tell you something specific. That Bible passage you've read dozens of times, but which suddenly came alive and spoke directly to your situation. That worship song that played on the radio just when you needed hope the most. That prophetic word someone spoke over you without knowing anything about your circumstances. These are not accidents. They are echoes of an eternal symphony where your life is one of the fundamental notes. The connection between Aimee and Kathryn Kuhlman teaches us something revolutionary about the nature of divine revelation. They are not isolated events that happen in a vacuum. They are part of a golden current that flows through generations, connecting hearts that have been molded to carry the same spiritual essence. When Aimee first saw those words, she planted a seed in the Garden of Time. When Kathryn received them, she harvested the ripe fruit. But the tree continues to grow. Its branches extend to this day. And you might be the next to receive a piece of this eternal revelation, perfectly tailored to the unique moment you're living. Think about that for a moment. If God worked through two women separated by decades to deliver the same message, what does that say about how He wants to work through you? Perhaps that feeling you have that you've been called to something greater isn't just imagination. Perhaps those moments when you sense an inexplicable presence aren't coincidence. Perhaps you are being prepared to be a link in a prophetic chain that connects past, present, and future. The story of Aimee and Kathryn Kuhlman is much more than a fascinating historical account. It's an invitation for you to recognize that you are part of something far greater than your individual life, that your spiritual experiences, however simple they may seem, can be fundamental pieces in the eternal puzzle God is assembling through history. That psalm that connected two lives across time continues to echo today, not only in the pages of the Bible, but in the hearts of those who are willing to listen. And perhaps, just perhaps, it is echoing in your heart right now. Whither shall I go from thy spirit? Or whither shall I flee from thy presence? The answer is simple: nowhere. Because you were chosen to carry a revelation. You were chosen to be part of a story that began before you were born and will continue long after you are gone. And when you finally understand this completely, when you accept that you are not here by chance, but by divine purpose, your life will never be the same. Because as Aimee and Kathryn Kuhlman discovered, some revelations are eternal, and some people are chosen to carry them through time, connecting generations in a stream of love and purpose that will never be broken. The question remains, what eternal revelation is waiting to be manifested through your life? What prophetic seed are you destined to plant so that someone, somewhere in the future, can harvest the ripe fruit? The answer is closer than you think, and it's waiting to be discovered in the silence of your next prayer.